The billboard glowed faintly under the moonlight, its eerie illumination casting long shadows across the cold, damp field. Queen Elena's sharp eyes locked onto it as she staggered forward, her black boots sinking into the soft earth. Every step was a struggle against her battered body, her once proud stance weakened by exhaustion. Smoke curled upward from the distant wreckage of her spacecraft, a stark reminder of how close she had come to death. The human man's face stared down at her from the billboard, his features bold and confident. Beneath his image, the glowing words in an alien script translated to, Dr. Max Haven, world-renowned trauma surgeon. Your hands, our care. Elena tilted her head slightly, her dark hair falling over one shoulder, her breathing labored. Every inhale sent a sharp jolt of pain through her chest. Blood trickled from a deep gash along her upper arm, soaking into the remnants of her torn royal uniform. The rebels had not been content to simply drive her from her throne, they had wanted her dead. Her dark eyes narrowed at the billboard, and she took another unsteady step forward. You'll do, she murmured aloud. There was something about the man's image that radiated a quiet authority, a confidence that intrigued her. She didn't trust easily. Cartha's court had taught her the price of misplaced faith. But right now, she had no choice. Her body would not hold much longer without medical attention. And this man would serve her, whether he wanted to or not. Steeling herself, she straightened her spine, forcing her aching body to obey. She glanced toward the distant lights of a town, a beacon of hope in this unfamiliar world, and began walking. Each step was a battle against gravity, against the pain that threatened to consume her. Her crash had been far enough from human settlements to avoid detection, but it was only a matter of time before the authorities, or worse, the rebels, traced her here. Clenching her jaw, she bit down on the frustration burning in her chest. The rebellion was one thing. She could understand their discontent, the propaganda that painted her as a ruthless tyrant. But pursuing her beyond the borders of Carth, daring to hunt her on this fragile world, that was a mistake. A mistake she would make them regret. Her thoughts drifted back to the man on the billboard. He had no idea what fate was marching toward him that night. Max Haven was standing in his modest kitchen when he first heard the knock at the door. It was firm and deliberate, the kind of knock that carried purpose. He frowned, glancing at the clock on the wall. Nearly midnight. The town was quiet at this hour, and his cabin was set back from the road, surrounded by dense pine trees. His jaw tightened as he set down his half-finished mug of coffee. He wasn't the kind of man to scare easily, but he wasn't naive either. Living in relative isolation suited him. It kept the noise and drama of the world at bay. Whoever was knocking at this hour was either lost, desperate, or trouble. The knock came again, louder this time. Max sighed and grabbed the old baseball bat leaning against the counter. He wasn't in the habit of greeting uninvited guests unarmed. The moment he opened the door, his grip on the bat slackened slightly. Standing on his doorstep was a tall woman, her blue skin gleaming faintly under the porch light. She was dressed in a torn white dress that clung to her figure, revealing deep cuts that oozed shimmering blood. Her dark hair hung loosely over her shoulders, damp with sweat, and her piercing black eyes met his with an intensity that made him freeze. "Are you Dr. Max Haven?" she demanded, her voice low but commanding. Max stared, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His first thought was that this had to be some elaborate prank, a costume, maybe. But then he saw the way she swayed on her feet, the way she pressed her hand against her side as if holding herself together. This was no prank. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice trailing off. "I require your assistance," the woman said, taking a step forward. Max instinctively backed away, his pulse quickening. "Lady, I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but you've got the wrong house. There's a hospital 15 miles from here." Before he could finish, she stumbled forward, her legs giving out beneath her. Max lunged to catch her, gripping her arms as she collapsed against him. Her skin was cool to the touch, her body surprisingly light. "Don't test me," she whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "You will help me." Max's gaze darted to the blood seeping from her wounds. His instincts as a surgeon took over, overriding his disbelief. "Damn it," he muttered, hoisting her into his arms. He carried her inside, setting her down on the worn leather couch in his living room. She groaned softly, her head lolling to the side. Grabbing his medical bag from the hallway closet, his mind raced. What the hell was she? He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over the wound on her arm. Her eyes flickered open, locking onto his. Even in her weakened state, her gaze was sharp, unyielding. "I am Queen Elena of Karth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you, human, will save me." Max stared at her, hands still poised over her injury. Years of medical training had conditioned him to treat any patient without question. But this was something else entirely. He was trained for war zones, trauma cases, but extraterrestrial royalty? That wasn't covered in med school. His hands worked swiftly, treating her injuries with the same precision he had applied in countless surgeries before. As he stitched up the gash on her arm, he muttered under his breath, "You've got some nerve showing up like this and barking orders." Her lips twitched faintly, almost a smirk. "I'm not accustomed to asking." "No kidding," Max said dryly, tying off the last stitch. He set his tools aside and wiped his hands, glancing at her face. Her eyes were half open, watching him with a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. "You're lucky I didn't just call the cops," he added, sitting back on his heels. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a sharp glare. "Call your authorities, and they will bring chaos to your doorstep. You wouldn't survive the consequences." Max frowned, leaning back against the coffee table. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," she said, shifting slightly as pain rippled through her body. "Your kind isn't ready for what would follow if they discovered me." Max exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what he believed, but one thing was clear: this woman wasn't leaving anytime soon. Max woke to the faint hum of static, his mind still clouded by exhaustion. He sat up, rubbing his face, and followed the sound into the living room. Elena stood by the coffee table, her back to him, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. In her hands was a small circular device that emitted a flickering blue glow. She was focused, her fingers moving with precision across its surface. Max leaned against the doorway, watching her. "What are you doing?" His voice was rough from sleep. Elena didn't turn. "Contacting my people." Max stepped closer, brow furrowed. "I thought you said your ship was wrecked." She exhaled sharply. "It is. But this is a personal transceiver. Limited range, but if there are any loyalists nearby, I might still reach them." Max crossed his arms. "And what happens if your rebels pick up the signal instead?" Elena turned, her expression unreadable. "Then we deal with it." Her voice was firm, but Max caught the flicker of worry in her dark eyes. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "We? You keep saying we like I signed up for this." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smirk. "You're already involved, Max Haven. Whether you like it or not." Before Max could respond, a sudden beep cut through the room. The transceiver's glow intensified, and a distorted voice crackled through the speakers. "Elena, loyalists, regroup, danger." The signal faded in and out, barely intelligible, but the urgency was unmistakable. Elena's grip tightened. "Who is it?" Max stepped closer. "A loyalist." She nodded, her face unreadable. "Or what's left of one." The voice crackled again. "Coordinates. Karth Fleet, rebels approaching, hurry." Then the signal cut out completely. Max glanced at Elena. "Did you get anything useful?" Her gaze was distant, calculating. "Coordinates. A rendezvous point. If the rebels are close, time is running out." Max sighed. "And your ship is still a smoldering wreck." Elena turned to him, her dark eyes blazing. "I need your help." Max let out a dry chuckle. Fixing people and fixing spaceships are two very different things. She stepped closer. You have steady hands. A quick mind. You understand precision. That's all I need. He studied her, half amused, half exasperated. Fine. But if this gets me killed, I'm blaming you. Elena's lips curved into a rare smile. Then let's hope you're as good as your reputation suggests. They worked late into the night. The propulsion core was damaged beyond what Max could comprehend, but with Elena's guidance, he followed her instructions as precisely as he would a surgical procedure. The ship groaned under their efforts, sparks flying as they repaired conduits and recalibrated systems. Max wiped sweat from his forehead. This is the hardest surgery I've ever done. Elena didn't look up. Then don't mess it up. They worked in silence, their movements synchronized. When Max made an adjustment, Elena was already ahead of him, anticipating the next step. For all her arrogance, she knew what she was doing. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon when they finally stabilized the last energy conduit. Max leaned back, exhausted. That's it. That's all I've got in me for one night. Elena surveyed their work, her expression unreadable. It's a start. But there's still much to do. Max sighed, stretching his stiff muscles. Of course there is. They made their way back to his cabin. As they walked, Max found himself glancing at Elena from the corner of his eye. She was a puzzle, arrogant, demanding, utterly alien. But there was something about her that made it impossible to ignore her presence. Why do I get the feeling you're going to make my life hell? He muttered. Elena smirked. Because you're finally starting to understand. Max's cabin was quiet when they returned. Elena moved toward the couch, her steps precise despite the weariness in her body. Max dropped into his chair with a groan. I'm starting to think I should have ignored that knock on my door. Elena tilted her head, a faint smirk touching her lips. And yet, here you are. Still alive. Still intrigued. Max let out a tired laugh. Intrigued isn't the word I'd use. Exhausted. Irritated. Maybe borderline insane. Elena's smirk widened slightly. A healer with a flair for dramatics. Fascinating. Before he could retort, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Max froze. Elena stiffened, her hand immediately going to the dagger at her side. Expecting company? She asked, voice low. Not unless someone's selling cookies at 6 in the morning, Max muttered. Elena shot him a look. Stay here. Before he could protest, she moved toward the door with the silent grace of a predator. She peered through the peephole, her expression hardening. It's a man. Armed. Max cursed under his breath. Let me see. Elena stepped aside. Max looked through the peephole and saw a tall man in a black coat. His face was shadowed under his hat, but the glint of a weapon holstered at his side was unmistakable. Do you recognize him? Elena asked. Max shook his head. No. But I don't like this. The man knocked again, louder this time. Dr. Haven? We need to talk. Max stepped back from the door, his mind racing. Elena's eyes narrowed. What do we do? Max exhaled. We see what he wants. If he's a threat, Elena's grip on her dagger tightened. I'll handle it. Max hesitated, then sighed. This is a terrible idea. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. The man took a step forward, sharp eyes scanning Maximum. Dr. Haven, he said, polite but distant. I'm with a private organization. We've been monitoring unusual activity in this area. Max's stomach twisted. I don't know what you're talking about. The man's lips curved into a faint smile. I think you do. The crash site, for example. Not exactly subtle. Max's grip on the door tightened. Unless you've got a warrant. The man cut him off, his tone turning cold. I'm not here to debate. I'm here to make sure whatever landed here doesn't pose a threat. Before Max could respond, Elena stepped into view. It doesn't, she said, her voice icy. The man froze, eyes widening as he took in her blue skin and regal bearing. Well, he murmured, his hand hovering near his weapon. I think we just answered a lot of questions. Elena stepped forward, unyielding. You have no jurisdiction here. Leave. The man's gaze flickered between them. Others are coming. They won't be as diplomatic. He turned and disappeared into the forest. Max shut the door, turning to Elena. Well, that's just great. Elena sheathed her dagger, her expression grim. We need to finish repairing the ship. Now. Max nodded, his heart pounding. Time was running out, and the stakes had just gotten higher.